All right, let's start somewhere very small. So small that you would normally ignore it. But I don't want you to ignore it. I want you to really look at it. Because everything we're about to talk about, your sleep, your mood, your bones, your immune system, every bit of it begins right here with something so tiny you can't see it. I'm talking about a single photon. Now I want you to picture this carefully. Not vaguely, really picture it. A particle of ultraviolet light leaves the surface of the sun. That's about 150 million kilometers away from where you are sitting right now. It travels through empty space at the fastest speed anything can move, about 300 kilometers per second. It crosses that entire distance in just over 8 minutes. And then, after all that, after that enormous journey across space, it arrives at your skin. Not a beam of light, not warmth, not sunshine the way you usually think about it, just one photon. And here's the part I want you to focus on. That one photon carries a very specific amount of energy. Not a lot by everyday standards, but enough, just enough to do something extremely precise. When it hits your skin, it is absorbed by a molecule sitting quietly in the outer layer of your body. A molecule, your body, actually placed there on purpose, waiting, and when that photon is absorbed, one chemical bond breaks. That's it. That's the whole event. One photon, one bond. Now, if you're like most people, you're thinking, that doesn't sound like much. And you're right. If you're thinking in terms of everyday experience, breaking one bond doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel like the kind of thing that should matter to your life in any meaningful way. But this is exactly where your intuition starts to fail you. And I want you to notice that, because what happens next is not small at all. That single broken bond changes the shape of the molecule. And when the shape changes, the molecule becomes something else. And that new molecule doesn't just sit there. It starts moving through your body, getting processed, transformed again and again, traveling from your skin to your liver, then to your kidneys, and eventually becoming a hormone, a real hormone, one that can enter your cells, reach your DNA, and control how your genes are expressed. So now I want you to pause for a second and really connect those 2 points. On one end, you have a single photon breaking a single bond. On the other end, you have changes in how over 200 of your genes behave. That's not a small effect. That's a cascade. And here's where it gets even stranger. Because I don't want you to think only from your perspective. I want you to think from the photon's perspective. According to the rules of relativity, something moving at the speed of light does not experience time. That means, for the photon, there was no journey, no 8 minutes, no distance. The moment it was created in the sun and the moment it was absorbed in your skin are, in a very real sense, the same event. So while you think of it as something traveling across space, from the photon's point of view, it simply appears and is immediately gone, having delivered its energy into your body. Creation and absorption, the same moment. Now think about what that means. Something that, from your perspective, took place across the vastness of space and time, from the photon's perspective, was instantaneous. And yet it is that exact event, that exact transfer of energy, that triggers a chain reaction inside you that will unfold over hours, days, even longer. So you have this strange mismatch, a process that is instantaneous on one level and extended, complex, and biological on another. And I want you to notice something else. Your body is not passive in this. That molecule in your skin is not there by accident. Your body made it. It synthesized it. It placed it exactly where the photon could reach it. It's been sitting there, waiting, like a lock, waiting for a key. And the photon is the key, not metaphorically, literally. Without the photon, nothing happens. The molecule just sits there. The chain never begins. The hormone is never produced. The genes are never affected. Everything downstream, every benefit you associate with sunlight depends entirely on that one moment when energy is transferred. And that's the idea I want you to carry with you as we move forward. Because it's very easy to think about sunlight in a vague way, as something warm or pleasant or good for you. But that's not what it is. At the most fundamental level, it is a stream of particles, each one carrying a specific packet of energy, each one capable of triggering precise physical changes inside your body. And if you don't receive those photons, if that interaction never happens, then none of the processes that depend on it can occur. So when you think about sunlight from now on, I don't want you to think about brightness or warmth. I want you to think about this. Somewhere, right now, a photon is leaving the sun, and in a few minutes, it may arrive at your skin. And when it does, it will either be absorbed or it won't. And that simple difference, that tiny event, is where everything begins. Now I want you to shift your attention, because what we just talked about, the photon, the bond, the beginning of the cascade, that's the physics. That's what is happening whether you notice it or not. But here's the part that actually concerns you, personally. Whether that process is happening often enough in your life or almost not at all. And this is where things get uncomfortable, because I'm going to ask you to compare two versions of your life, not in some abstract way, but very concretely. I want you to think about your childhood, not the highlights, not the big events, just the ordinary days. You woke up, you went outside, and you stayed there. You didn't calculate exposure time. You didn't think about ultraviolet wavelengths or hormones or circadian rhythms. You just existed in an environment where sunlight was constant, unavoidable, and completely normal. You ran, you played, you sat on the ground, you walked under the sky, and all the mechanisms we just discussed were running at full capacity. Every single day, without you ever having to think about them. Your skin was receiving photons. Your eyes were receiving photons. Your entire system was synchronized with the light-dark cycle of the planet you live on. And here's the important part. You never once thought about it, because nothing was broken. Now I want you to look at your life today, because something changed, and it didn't happen all at once. That's what makes it difficult to notice. It happened slowly, in a way that felt completely normal while it was happening. School moved indoors. Work moved indoors. Transportation moved into cars, buses, trains, sealed environments that separate you from direct light. Even leisure time shifted toward screens, rooms, controlled lighting, artificial environments. And at no point did anyone say, you are about to remove yourself from the primary energy input. Your body was designed to receive. But that is exactly what happened. You didn't stop needing sunlight. You just stopped getting it. And I want you to be very precise about this, because your brain will try to minimize it. It will say, well, I still go outside sometimes. Or there's light coming through the window. Or my room is bright. But none of those are equivalent to what you had before. Not even close. The intensity, the spectrum, the duration, everything is different. What you have now is not a slightly reduced version of your natural environment. It is a fundamentally altered one. And your body did not evolve for this. Your biology expects a certain number of photons to arrive at your skin and your eyes every day. Not occasionally. not in small amounts, consistently, reliably. As part of the normal operation of the system, when that input drops not to zero, but below the threshold your system expects, you don't get a dramatic failure. You don't collapse. You don't get an immediate signal that something is wrong. Instead, you get something much more subtle. The system just starts running below optimal. And this is the part that makes it dangerous, because subtle changes are easy to ignore. Your sleep becomes a little less stable. Your mood fluctuates a little more. Your energy drops slightly. Your immune system becomes just a bit less effective. Your bones lose density so slowly you can't feel it. Your blood pressure shifts gradually. Nothing dramatic, nothing that forces you to stop and say, something is clearly broken. But everything is drifting. And the longer you stay in that state, the more normal it begins to feel. You adapt psychologically to a lower baseline. What used to be off becomes just how things are. You forget what it felt like when the system was fully supported, because that version of your life is now far behind you. And then there's another layer to this, one that becomes more important as you get older, because it's not just that your environment changed, it's that your ability to compensate for that change also declines. Your body becomes less efficient. The same reduced input produces a larger deficit. The same lack of sunlight that you might have tolerated when you were younger now has a stronger effect, so the gap widens. Less input, weaker response. And again, nothing dramatic happens all at once. It accumulates year after year. The difference between what your body expects and what it actually receives grows larger. And the consequences spread across multiple systems, all linked back to the same missing input. And here's the part I want you to really sit with. You didn't choose this in a deliberate way. You didn't wake up one day and decide to disconnect yourself from sunlight. Your life simply moved in a direction that made it harder and harder to receive it. Work, convenience, safety, comfort, every step made sense on its own. But taken together, they produced a result your biology was never designed to handle. So when you feel the effects, and we're going to go through those effects in detail, you might be tempted to think of them as separate problems. Sleep issues, mood changes, health concerns, aging. But I want you to see them differently. I want you to see them as symptoms of a single underlying condition, a chronic mismatch between the environment your body evolved for and the environment you now live in. A photon deficit, not a complete absence, just not enough. And the most important thing about that deficit is this: your body is still waiting. The molecules are still there. The systems are still in place. The pathways we talked about in the beginning have not disappeared. They are simply understimulated, underactivated, running below capacity, which means the story we're telling is not just about loss. It's about something that can still be turned back on. Now let's go back to that moment we started with. You remember it, right? One photon, one bond. I told you not to ignore it. And now I'm going to show you why. Because what looks like a tiny chemical event is actually the front door to one of the most powerful biological systems in your body. And I want you to follow this carefully, because if you miss even one step, the whole thing just sounds like sunlight is good for you. And that's not what this is. This is engineering. But it's easy, layered, unavoidable. So you're standing there, light hitting your skin, and that photon, just one, gets absorbed by a molecule called 7-dehydrocholesterol. Now don't worry about the name. What matters is this: your body made this molecule on purpose and placed it in your skin like a sensor. It's sitting there, waiting, not passively, but specifically tuned to absorb ultraviolet B light. When the photon arrives, It delivers about four electron volts of energy, just enough to break one particular bond in that molecule, the bond between two carbon atoms. And when that bond breaks, the ring structure of the molecule opens, the shape changes. And in biology, shape is everything. The molecule is no longer what it was. It becomes something new, previtamin D3. Now I want you to notice something here, because this is where your intuition might slip again. Nothing alive has happened yet. No enzymes, no cells doing work, no active decision making, just physics. Energy comes in, a bond breaks, structure changes. That's it. But that change sets off a chain that your entire body is prepared to continue, because now time and temperature take over. At about 37 degrees Celsius, your body temperature, that previtamin D3 slowly rearranges itself over the next day or two. No external input required. It just shifts into a more stable form, becoming vitamin D3, also known as cholecalciferol. Still not active, still not the final product, just another step in the process. And now it enters your bloodstream. From your skin, it travels to your liver. And in your liver, enzymes add a hydroxyl group, just a small chemical modification. But again, it changes the function. Now it becomes calcidiol. Then it moves again, this time to your kidneys, where another hydroxyl group is added. And now, only now, you have calcitriol, the active form of vitamin D. And this is where things get serious, because calcitriol is not just another molecule floating around. It's a hormone. That means it has access to your cells, and more importantly, to your DNA. It can pass through the cell membrane, enter the nucleus, and bind to specific receptors that sit directly on your genetic material. These receptors act as switches, transcription factors, that determine which genes are turned on and which are turned off. So now I want you to connect the full chain. A photon hits your skin. A bond breaks. A molecule changes shape. That molecule is transformed, step by step, across multiple organs, until it becomes a hormone that can control gene expression inside your cells. We're not talking about a minor effect. We're talking about regulation of over 200 genes. Genes that control how you absorb calcium from your food, how your bones mineralize, how your immune cells function, how your cells grow and divide. This is not peripheral. This is central. And here's the part that I find fascinating, and I want you to really appreciate it. Your skin is not just a protective barrier. It's a production site. It's a factory. And sunlight is not just exposure. It's the raw material that drives the entire system. Without the input, the factory doesn't run. The machinery is there, perfectly intact, but idle. Now compare that to what you might do instead. You take a supplement, a pill, maybe 400 units, maybe 1, 0, 0, 0, if you're being careful. And that does have an effect, sure. But under the right conditions, just 10 to 15 minutes of midday sunlight on your arms and face your skin can produce something like 10. 0, 0, 0 to 20. 0, 0, 0 units of vitamin D3. Not over a week, not over a month, in a single session. So now you have to ask yourself, which system do you think your body was designed to rely on? And it gets even more interesting, because your skin has a built-in safety mechanism. Once enough previtamin D3 accumulates, additional ultraviolet exposure doesn't just keep increasing production indefinitely. Instead, excess molecules are converted into inert byproducts. In other words, the system regulates itself. It prevents overload. You cannot overdose on vitamin D produced this way, but you can with supplements. That should tell you something about which pathway is natural and which one is an approximation. And I want you to notice the elegance of this. No conscious control, no measurement, no decision-making required. The system responds directly to input. More photons up to a point mean more production. Beyond that point, the system stabilizes. It's self-limiting, self-regulating, and completely dependent on the environment you are in. So when you stay indoors, when you reduce your exposure, when the photons don't arrive, nothing dramatic shuts down. The factory doesn't break, it just slows. Production drops. Hormone levels fall. Gene regulation shifts subtly. And all the systems that depend on that regulation, your bones, your immune system, your metabolism, begin to operate at a lower level. Not zero, just less. And that less is where the problem lives, because you don't feel a single missing photon. You don't notice a single bond that didn't break. But over time, the absence accumulates. The cascade doesn't run at full strength. The signals weaken, and your biology quietly, gradually moves away from the state it was designed to maintain, all because the factory is waiting and the raw material never arrives. Let me take you somewhere you don't normally think about when you hear the word sunlight. Not your skin, not warmth, not even vision. I want you to think about time, the time your body believes it is right now, which, as strange as it sounds, is not automatically the same as the actual time outside. And the only reason those two stay aligned on most days is because of light. You assume, quite naturally, that your eyes are there so you can see the world. Shapes, colors, motion, that's what you experience. But buried inside that same system is something else entirely. Something you never notice because it doesn't create an image. It doesn't help you recognize anything. It doesn't make the world clearer. What it does instead is measure light as a signal and then use that signal to tell your brain what time it is. Now I want you to follow this carefully. Light enters your eye and reaches the retina. Most of it is handled by rods and cones. The cells responsible for vision. But there is another layer, a quieter system operating behind the scenes, cells that are not interested in forming pictures at all. These are specialized neurons containing a pigment called melanopsin, and they are tuned to a very specific part of the spectrum, blue light, around 480 nanometers. Not by accident. That wavelength corresponds closely to natural daylight. And when these cells detect light, they don't send the information to the part of your brain that builds visual images. Instead, they send it somewhere else entirely, along a dedicated neural pathway, straight into a small cluster of neurons deep in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's tiny, only about 20,000 cells, but functionally, it acts as the master clock that coordinates your entire body. Everything that feels like a daily rhythm originates there. When you wake up in the morning and feel alert, when your body reaches peak performance in the afternoon, when you begin to feel sleepy at night, those are not random fluctuations. They are scheduled outputs from this clock, orchestrating hormone release, body temperature, digestion, and neural activity across a 2-4 hour cycle. But here's the part that most people don't realize. The clock is not perfectly accurate on its own, left without any external reference. It drifts slightly, but consistently. Instead of running on a precise 2-4 4-hour cycle. It stretches to about 24, 2 hours. That difference sounds trivial, but it accumulates day after day. The timing shifts. Over time, your internal sense of morning and night begins to slide away from the actual rotation of the Earth. So the system needs a daily correction, and that correction is not optional. Each morning, when light enters your eyes and activates those melanopsin cells, a signal is sent that effectively says, this is the beginning of the day. The clock resets. It locks back onto the 2-4-hour cycle of the planet. Without that signal, the clock keeps running, but it runs free, like a watch that's no longer synchronized. Now I want you to compare that requirement with the environment you live in, because here's the problem. The light intensity indoors, the light you spend most of your time under, is dramatically lower than what this system was built for. A typical room might give you 100 to 500 lux. That feels bright to you. You can see perfectly well. But for the melanopsin system, it's barely a signal at all. To trigger a strong, reliable response, those cells need something closer to 1. 0, 0, 0 to do. 0, 0, 0 lux. Step outside, even into shade on a cloudy day, and you're suddenly in an environment with 10. 0, 0, 0 lux or more. Direct sunlight goes far beyond that. So what you've done, without realizing it, is move from an environment where your brain receives a strong, clear timing signal every morning into one where that signal is weak, inconsistent, and often insufficient. And your brain doesn't complain loudly about this. It doesn't send you a clear error message. Instead, the effects show up indirectly. Your sleep becomes less stable. You feel tired at times when you should be alert, and alert when you should be winding down. You wake up in the middle of the night. You feel like your energy has no clear rhythm, and it's tempting to interpret all of that as stress, or aging, or just how life is now. But I want you to consider a different explanation. Your clock is not broken. It's just not receiving a strong enough signal to stay synchronized. And as you get older, this becomes even more fragile. The lens of your eye slowly changes, filtering out more of the blue light that melanopsin depends on. So even when light does reach your eyes, less of it is effective. The signal weakens from both sides, fewer photons entering, and fewer being properly detected. So the system loses precision. The boundaries between day and night blur. The amplitude of your biological rhythms flattens. And here's the key point I want you to walk away with. There is no chemical shortcut for this. You can take something to make yourself sleepy. You can take something to make yourself more alert. But neither of those replaces the actual timing signal your brain is waiting for, because the signal is not a substance. It's light. And if that light doesn't arrive clearly, strongly, at the right time, then your brain is left trying to guess what time it is. And it turns out it's not very good at guessing. There's something else happening when light enters your eyes. And this one is harder to notice because you don't experience it as a mechanism, you experience it as a feeling, a shift in mood, a subtle lift, or, on the other side, a kind of heaviness that you can't quite explain. And most people, when they feel that change, they don't look at the light around them. They look at their thoughts, their circumstances, their stress. But I want you to look somewhere else. I want you to follow the signal, because the same pathway we just talked about, the one that carries light information from your retina into your brain, does not stop at your internal clock. It connects to other regions, including a set of nuclei deep in your brainstem known as the Raphe nuclei. And these structures are responsible for producing one of the most important neurotransmitters in your entire nervous system, serotonin. Now, you've probably heard of serotonin before. It's often described as a mood chemical, which is a simplification, but not entirely wrong. It plays a role in how stable you feel, how resilient you are to stress, how your brain processes emotional information. It also happens to be the primary target of one of the most widely prescribed classes of antidepressants, the SSRIs, which work by keeping serotonin active in the brain for longer. But here's the part that usually gets left out. Your brain doesn't just recycle serotonin. It has to produce it, and that production is influenced directly by how much light reaches your eyes. This isn't a metaphor. It's not philosophical. It's measurable. Researchers have taken blood samples from veins draining the brain and observed that serotonin turnover increases with exposure to bright light. Not slightly, significantly. More light in, more serotonin produced, less light and less production. So now I want you to connect this with your daily life. Think about a day when you stay indoors, under artificial lighting, maybe moving between rooms, screens, enclosed spaces. The light is there, but it's weak, filtered, limited in intensity. And then compare that to a day when you step outside into bright daylight, even for a short time. You don't have to analyze it. You feel the difference. Something shifts. That feeling is not abstract. It's biochemical, because when enough photons enter your eyes, those melanopsin cells fire strongly, and the signal travels along that pathway, activating serotonin production in your brain. And that increase doesn't just affect your mood in the moment. It sets up what happens later. Because serotonin is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of another transformation. At night, your brain takes that same serotonin and converts it into melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep. So now you have a continuous chain. Light during the day increases serotonin, and that serotonin becomes the raw material for melatonin at night. And I want you to see how tightly connected this system is. If your daytime light exposure is low, your serotonin production is low. If your serotonin is low, your melatonin production is also low. And if melatonin is low, your sleep suffers. Poor sleep then affects your mood, your energy, your behavior the next day, often making you less likely to go outside and get the light you need. So the system feeds itself, but it can feed itself in the wrong direction. Less light, less serotonin, worse sleep, lower energy, less light again. And this is where people often get trapped, because they treat each piece as a separate problem. Mood becomes something psychological. Sleep becomes something behavioral. Energy becomes something to push through. But underneath all of it, there may be a single physical variable that has quietly dropped below the level your system needs. Photon input. And when that input is restored, the system can begin to correct itself from the top down. Now consider something else. There's a condition known as seasonal affective disorder, where people experience depression that follows the pattern of the seasons, worse in winter, better in summer. And for a long time, people debated whether this was psychological, environmental, or something else entirely. But when you look at the data, a very clear pattern emerges. During the months when daylight is reduced, fewer photons reach the retina. Serotonin production drops. And both mood and sleep are affected. And how do you treat it? Not with a new kind of thought, not with a new belief, with light. Bright light therapy around 10. 000 lux. Delivered to the eyes in the morning can restore serotonin levels and improve mood. The treatment is not symbolic. It is physical. The photons enter the eye. The pathway activates The chemistry changes. The same system you use every day, just given the input, it was missing. And I want you to take a moment and reflect on how simple and how strange that is. Something as complex as your emotional state, something that feels deeply personal and psychological, can be influenced directly by the number of photons entering your eyes. Not completely determined by it. Of course, your thoughts, your experiences, your environment, all of that matters. But this layer, this physical layer, is always there, whether you pay attention to it or not. So the next time you notice your mood shifting when you feel unusually low or strangely flat or disconnected, I don't want you to jump immediately to abstract explanations. I want you to ask a simpler question first. How much light have you actually received today? Because your brain is not just thinking. It's also responding, and sometimes what it's responding to is simply the absence of light. Up to this point, you might still be thinking of sunlight as something that mainly affects your skin in one way, vitamin D or your brain through your eyes. But that picture is incomplete, and I want you to widen it. Because light is doing something else entirely, something that doesn't wait for hormones, doesn't need long biochemical cascades, and doesn't depend on your thoughts or your sleep. It acts directly, physically, on your blood. And I want you to follow this carefully, because this mechanism is so simple that it almost feels surprising we don't talk about it more often. Your skin is not just producing molecules, it is also storing them. Specifically, it stores compounds related to nitric oxide, a gas that plays a critical role in regulating your blood vessels. Nitric oxide is what tells your arteries to relax, to widen, to allow blood to flow more easily. When nitric oxide levels increase, your blood pressure drops. When it decreases, your vessels constrict and pressure rises. This is not abstract physiology. It is one of the central control systems of your cardiovascular health. Now here's where light enters the picture again, but in a different way than before. This time, it's not UVB, the higher energy ultraviolet light that drives vitamin D production. It's UVA, slightly longer wavelength, lower energy, and able to penetrate deeper into your skin. And when UVA photons enter your skin, they interact with those stored nitric oxide compounds. The energy they carry is enough to break the chemical bonds that keep nitric oxide in its stored form. So once again, we have the same pattern. A photon arrives, energy is transferred. A bond breaks. But this time, instead of triggering a long chain of transformations across organs, the effect is immediate. Nitric oxide is released directly into your bloodstream. It diffuses into the smooth muscle cells that line your blood vessels, activating a biochemical pathway that causes those muscles to relax. Your arteries widen, blood flows more freely, pressure drops. No waiting, no conversion steps, no involvement from your liver or kidneys, just light interacting with chemistry, producing a physiological effect in real time. And I want you to notice something important here. This pathway has nothing to do with vitamin D. It operates independently, which means sunlight is affecting your cardiovascular system through multiple mechanisms at once. Some slow and hormonal, others fast and direct. Now think about the implications of that. Cardiovascular disease, heart attacks. Strokes is one of the leading causes of death worldwide. And here you have a mechanism built into your body where exposure to sunlight can directly reduce one of the key risk factors, high blood pressure. Not eliminate it, not replace medical care, but influence it in a measurable, physical way. And yet, this is where the story becomes more complicated. Because I don't want you to walk away with a simple message like, more sun is always better. That would be wrong. And physics doesn't allow that kind of simplification, because the same ultraviolet radiation that produces vitamin D and releases nitric oxide is also capable of damaging your DNA. This is the trade-off. When UVB photons enter your skin, they don't only interact with the molecules that help you, they can also strike your DNA directly, causing specific types of damage like bonding errors between adjacent bases, structures that shouldn't exist. Your cells have repair systems to fix these mistakes, and they are remarkably effective. Every day, your body repairs thousands of such lesions without you ever noticing. But the system is not perfect. Some damage escapes repair. And over time, accumulated errors increase the risk of mutation. And in some cases, cancer. So now you're dealing with two simultaneous truths. The same photon that initiates beneficial processes, hormone production. Vascular regulation can also contribute to long-term damage. Both effects are real. Both are governed by the same underlying physics. And this is where dose becomes everything, because your body is not defenseless. It is designed to handle a certain level of exposure within that range. Repair mechanisms keep up with damage, and the benefits dominate. But beyond that range, damage begins to accumulate faster than it can be corrected. So the question is not whether sunlight is good or bad. The question is how much. And when you look at the data, something very interesting appears. A relatively short exposure, on the order of 10 to 20 minutes of direct sunlight on your skin, is enough to trigger significant vitamin D production, release nitric oxide, and activate multiple beneficial pathways, all while staying within the capacity of your body's repair systems. Beyond that, the benefits plateau, while the risks continue to increase. So the system has a kind of natural operating window. Within it, sunlight functions as a powerful regulatory input. Outside it, the same input becomes progressively more harmful. And I want you to see how consistent this pattern is with everything we've discussed so far. Light is not a vague good thing. It is a physical input with measurable effects, thresholds, and consequences. Too little. And systems begin to underperform too much, and damage accumulates. But within the right range, it does something remarkable. It reaches into your body, breaks bonds in exactly the right places, releases molecules that change how your blood flows, and supports systems that have been evolving to respond to this exact signal for millions of years. So when you think about sunlight now, I don't want you to think in extremes. Avoid it completely, or seek as much as possible. I want you to think in terms of balance, in terms of interaction, in terms of a system that was built not to escape light, but to use it, because your body is not trying to protect you from the sun entirely. It's trying to work with it. Now I want you to step back for a moment, because up to now we've been looking at pieces one mechanism at a time, one pathway after another, as if we were taking the system apart on a table. And that's useful, because it lets you see how each part works. But it can also be misleading, because your body does not operate in pieces. It operates as a whole. Everything we've talked about, photons, molecules, hormones, neurones, blood vessels, they are not separate stories. They are all happening at the same time, inside you, right now, whether you notice it or not. So let's put it back together. That photon we started with doesn't just lead to vitamin D. it leads to calcitriol, the active hormone that reaches into your cells and changes how your body handles calcium. And calcium, despite how simple it sounds, is one of the most tightly regulated elements in your biology. Your nerves need it. Your muscles need it. Your heart depends on it. So if your body doesn't get enough calcium from your diet, it doesn't simply accept that shortage. It takes it from somewhere else. It takes it from your bone. Now think about that carefully. Your skeleton is not just a structure. It is a reservoir, a storage system that your body will draw from if necessary to keep everything else functioning. And without sufficient calcitriol, without that hormone that began with a photon breaking a bond in your skin, your intestines absorb far less calcium from the food you eat. Maybe 10 to 15% instead of 30 or 40. So over time, quietly, invisibly, your body begins to withdraw calcium from your bones to compensate. You don't feel this happening. There is no pain signal, no warning. But the density of your bones slowly decreases. They become weaker, more fragile, more likely to fracture under stress that would once have been trivial. And this is where the consequences stop being abstract. Because a fracture, especially later in life, is not just an injury. It can be the beginning of a cascade. Reduced mobility, loss of independence, increased risk of infection, blood clots, systemic decline. Something as simple as a fall can become a life-altering event. And part of the chain that leads there began much earlier with a system that was not receiving the input it required, but it